Mom, you know. On the eve of my only daughter's wedding, she stood behind me with her head down. Well, you scared me. What's up? What's going on? There is something I haven't told you, Mom. Slowly, Olivia raised her head. Seeing her expression, I swallowed hard. Then she tightly gripped something heavy in her hand. I'm sorry, Mom. What? Wait, what is that? What should have been a night full of happiness turned into one stained with sadness and resentment. My name is Emily. At 24, I married Mason, a senior colleague at work, and we were blessed with a daughter, Olivia. I left my job to dedicate myself to taking care of our child, and my husband, Mason, worked hard to support our family. We were a bright and happy family, our neighbors often telling us how blissful we seemed. But one day, that daily life was suddenly shattered. It was just after Olivia turned 5. Mason went to work one day and never returned. No one at his workplace knew why, and from the next day, he started missing work without any notice. I consulted with my in-laws and neighbors, but no one had any clue about where he could have gone. I wondered if he had been involved in an accident or an incident, but I couldn't find anything in the newspapers or news broadcasts. The kind Mason had completely disappeared. Losing my husband so suddenly was heartbreaking, but I couldn't just keep crying. I had to start working again to support Olivia, raising her on my own. Despite her young age, Olivia seemed to understand the situation and started actively helping with chores like cooking and cleaning. By the time she graduated from elementary school, she was even making my lunch, which was a big help. She's such a wonderful daughter. I wish you could have seen her, Mason. Where did you go? I often found myself muttering to Mason's photo. As Olivia and I supported each other, she quickly grew up. In the blink of an eye, 20 years passed, and Olivia, now 25, was about to get married. Though it was sad to see her leave the nest, every time I saw her happy face, my heart felt full. I'm sorry, honey. I wish your dad could be here for your wedding, I said to her on the eve of her wedding. Olivia just shook her head with a smile. I'm so happy just to have you here, Mom. Hey, can you tell me about Dad tonight? I want to hear all about him from you. So, we began talking about Mason. Pulling out an old, faded photo album, we reminisced about each memory. This photo is when you first stood up. Mason was so moved that when he took this picture, he cried, you know. As we talked, the happy days felt like they were just yesterday. Memories of our short-lived family of 3 came flooding back. Then we reached the last page of the album. There was a photo from our wedding. It was a group photo with our friends, and it felt like I could hear the happy voices from that day. Well, this is your wedding photo, Mom. You look so cute in your wedding dress. You'll be wearing a wedding dress soon, right? I'll take a beautiful photo for you. Olivia's eyes sparkled as she looked at my photo, but then her expression suddenly became serious. Wait a minute. She grabbed the album and started intently scrutinizing the photo. I was a bit surprised at how intensely she was staring at the wedding photo. What's wrong? Why are you glaring at the wedding photo like that? Do you recognize this person? Who is she? Olivia asked, tilting her head and pointing to a woman in the group photo. That person was making a peace sign in the corner of the group photo. I frowned for a moment upon hearing that. She was Aurea, a friend invited by Mason, his childhood friend. I had only met her at the wedding, but she left a strong and memorable impression. Aurea stood out in a not-so-good way. She was overly touchy with Mason, in front of me, the newlywed bride, touching his hands and leaning on his shoulder. Mason, you look so handsome in a suit. I wish I had married you, she said nonchalantly in front of me, which made me and everyone around a bit uncomfortable. Despite this, only Mason didn't seem to be fazed, laughing it off. Hey, don't get too clingy at the wedding. Seriously, you've always been too close for comfort since we were kids. Do that stuff when no one's watching. It's embarrassing, right? Watching the two of them, I felt they had a connection beyond just childhood friends. However, bringing it up at the wedding would only create a bad atmosphere. So, back then, I held back everything I wanted to say and just kept a polite smile. When Olivia asked about Aurea, unpleasant memories from that time resurfaced and I felt a sense of unease. Besides, you weren't born at that time. I haven't seen her since the wedding, so you shouldn't know her. Despite my response, Olivia looked certain. No, I'm sure. I've met her before. There was an ominous foreboding, and I swallowed hard. Where did you meet her? Here. At our house. She came over to visit several times. I was taken aback in shock. I wanted to laugh it off as a joke, but Olivia's expression was dead serious. I was at a loss for words and remained silent. Didn't Dad tell you? What do you mean? How could Arya have been at our house? When was this? I remember it was just before Dad disappeared, when I was about 5. When you were out, she would come over and take care of me with Dad. It's a distant memory, but I clearly remember her face. If my daughter's story is true, then Mason had invited Arya over to our house. And considering he didn't tell me a thing about it, it's clear that it wasn't an innocent invitation. Judging from Arya's behavior at the wedding, I could easily imagine this happening. I was suddenly struck by doubts I'd never had before, and I could feel my breath becoming shallow. I wanted to rush out and start investigating my husband right away, but tomorrow was my daughter's wedding. I suppressed my feelings of urgency and gently closed the photo album. Let's set aside your dad's issue for now. Tomorrow is your big day, after all. But Mom, it's important to you, isn't it? Maybe we should look into Dad's affairs. Right now, the most important thing for me is to see through my only daughter's wedding. But after that's over, maybe you could help me with this. My daughter nodded in agreement to my words. The next day, my daughter's wedding was celebrated with grandeur. I couldn't help comparing it to my own past, but thankfully, there was no sign of someone as vile as Arya, which was a relief. I just want my daughter to be happy from now on. As for Mason, who had caused trouble for such a wonderful daughter from a young age, I started to feel unforgivable anger. I had worried that he was involved in some incident, but maybe he actually was betraying me all along. Wanting to know the truth, I later went with my daughter to a private investigator to look into my husband. The investigation confirmed the worst scenario. Mason was living a happy life, even now. Moreover, he was living with Arya, the woman my daughter pointed out in the album, and they have a high school-aged child. I couldn't hide my anger at him building a completely separate family, but what was more unforgivable was that he was still living with his mistress and their child, pushing aside his own daughter. I wanted to confront Mason right away, but first, I decided to move out of the house. I had always took care of this house up despite everything, so that Mason wouldn't be destitute when he returned, but now the situation has changed. With the help of my daughter and her husband, I decided to dispose of all of Mason's belongings. I sent my own things to a room I had rented in advance, leaving the house empty. Of course, I threw Mason's photos into the trash bag. I ripped up the wedding photo that had led to uncovering Mason's awful secret and threw it away. After losing everything, I stormed over to the apartment where Arya and Mason lived. When I rang the intercom, the man who had been missing for 20 years casually appeared. I was so taken aback by how easily I found the man I'd been searching for so long that I couldn't help but laugh. Long time no see. Your daughter has grown up, but the child here is quite big too, isn't he? Emily. Why are you here? Mason was flustered. I took him to a nearby diner, and Mason also called Arya over. Arya arrived later, seemingly informed by Mason of the situation, but she brazenly ordered an omelette as if nothing was wrong. Thought it was someone else, but it's just a poor, abandoned wife. You look so tired. You always had a plain face. I recognized you right away. Arya, far from being remorseful, smugly wrapped her arm around Mason's. Mason, who had been nervous just moments ago, seemed to relax, thinking he had the upper hand now. What do you want with me now? I built a happy family here. You're not thinking of making my family suffer just because you had a hard time, are you? Mason's words nearly brought me to tears. If you care so much about your current family, then how could you so easily abandon me and our daughter? I raised my voice, and Mason's eyes widened in shock. But soon, he smirked and looked at Arya before responding. Well, I met Arya again at the wedding after a long time, and I just thought she was still so cute. Meeting my cute childhood friend like this, it felt like fate. For such a silly reason. Plus, Emily, you gained weight after our child was born, right? You became so unattractive, I couldn't stand to look at you. But Arya, she's still as cute as ever. Switching to her was definitely the right move. Look at you now, you've aged. I couldn't live with someone like that. I didn't feel like talking to Mason anymore after he said that. Whatever I say, it wouldn't get through to him. I simply presented Mason and Arya with a demand for alimony. Arya's eyes went wide and she leaned forward in shock. Alimony? Wait a minute. That would be troublesome. You mean to say you never filed for divorce, even though Mason disappeared for 20 years? I thought he might come back someday, so I kept our marriage registered. Never thought it would come in handy like this. After I said that, Arya shook off Mason's arm and started yelling furiously. I agreed to this because Mason said, if I pretend to disappear, she'll divorce me on her own, and I won't have to pay alimony. I'm the victim here. Mason's the only bad guy, you liar. Arya slapped Mason on the cheek hard and stormed out of the restaurant. Mason held his cheek, flustered. Wait. I can't pay alimony. I'm not working right now. I was living off support from Arya's wealthy parents. If things go this way, they'll disown her. How can I pay a huge amount of money when I can't even support myself? What convenient excuses. Weren't you the one who left a young daughter with me, who didn't have a job at the time? This is the result of your actions, so brace yourself. By the way, I've already sold the house we lived in, so you'll need to find a place to live. As I stood up to leave, Mason grabbed my hand and pleaded with tears in his eyes. Wait, Emily, let's start over. Our daughter wanted to see me, right? A family should be together. I'll apologize, so forgive me. You must have mistaken. I shook off Mason's hand and looked down at him coldly. You're a stranger to me now. You threw us away 20 years ago, didn't you? Mason slumped over the table as an omelet was served to him. Mason used to make omelets for our daughter and me. With this small memory, we were finally able to end everything completely. As a result, Mason and Arya were each ordered to pay $30,000 in alimony. Arya, who broke up with Mason, was disowned by her family for hiding the fact that their relationship was an affair and lost their financial support, forcing her to take up part-time jobs she wasn't used to working for. With a high school-aged child, her struggles will only increase from here. Mason was hired by a supermarket nearby, but it was pitiful to see him, no longer young, carrying heavy boxes and being yelled at by bosses younger than him. Mason, unable to pay the alimony, ended up in debt, and his future looks bleak, but that's none of my concern. As for me, I was prepared to live alone, but my son-in-law suggested that we live together. He must have heard about my struggles from my daughter. He kindly asked me to stay with him, and I gladly accepted his offer. The kindness was truly a relief after everything I had been through. Now, I live happily with my daughter and my son-in-law. For someone who had been living together with her daughter for so long, this new life is lively and joyful. And there's more good news on the horizon. Our family is about to grow. My daughter is expecting, and there's a new life inside her. We plan to take a family photo when the baby is born. I threw away all the old family photos when I left the house. I want to forget those terrible memories and start a new album with the first photo marking many more happy memories to come.